Yeah, so we were up to the point that the oral law had been pure. Everything was clear till the end of the Second Temple era, and that was the time of the Civil War. The students of Hill and Shammai were involved there, and seemingly as a result of that, they did not spend enough time with their teachers, and they ended up disagreeing over many, many halachos. Well, the Second Temple was destroyed, and things deteriorated further. What happened was that the rabbinical leadership at first remained up north and was unaffected by the destruction. Jerusalem was destroyed, its inhabitants were killed, many were killed, others were taken as slaves to Rome. A lot of the country fled to Babylon. The rabbis remained up north. And they continued with the mesorah, the oral tradition. But it became clear that with time the oral tradition is becoming less and less clear and is deteriorating rapidly. Now, we spoke about the idea of the oral law, why it had to be oral, because we're dealing with principles. We are not dealing with just rules, we're dealing with principles, abstract principles that are being taught by way of example. And the example, like cases, their meanings would change with cultural changes, and therefore the medium itself had to be flexible so that people would understand just what they were supposed to be representing. There was a prohibition about making a sacred text where there would be just one set of cases that were being taught, because that would be subject to misinterpretation with time. The rabbis realized that there was no choice. The oral law would not become written, but there's got to be something standardized that people can check whatever they were being taught against to know that it was accurate. This was the background to the establishment of the Mishnah. In terms of the who's who, Rabbi Akiva was the one really that divided between what we call Medrash today and Mishnah, as well as the different Masechtot, the tractates, where he was the one that really divided the oral law into its parts. His student, Rabbi Meir, he had many students, 24,000 of them which died. Rabbi Meir was one of his second set of students. Rabbi Meir was known as the genius among the rabbis in those days, so much so that people felt insecure trusting him because they felt that he could out-reason anyone and can prove anything wrong right. Yeah.
Rabbi Akiva was after the Civil War?
Rabbi Akiva was after the Civil War, yes.
Because I know, I think yesterday you were saying that there was like a lack of Benadam Lefavero, which was why, and then I know that it says similarly that with Rabbi Akiva.
It continued.
Was it still?
There wasn't Civil War. There wasn't Civil War, but the basic disrespect for one another still continued. As a culture, it still continued. Civil War was over with because the Romans just attacked and there wasn't much of a choice.
Like, was it political or like this disrespect was just like
disrespect? No, just total disrespect. It was that each ran for himself. Everybody believed in what they were doing. Anyone who disagreed with it was wrong, and that's the end of it. Now, of course, there were different degrees. It's very hard to just label the entire nation as being evil, but that had become part of the culture. The genius of Rabbi Meir, at least part of it, what he was best known for, is in the way he was able to zero in on a group of cases that were almost identical with minute differences. And if you understood the basic underlying concept of the halacha, you would understand why seemingly identical cases had different halacha. Because they were slightly different, and if you understood the principle, you'd be able to see why it was this way in this case and that way in the other case. So Rabbi Meir's genius was best expressed in his ability to put together similar cases that were a drop different, and would thus be able to illustrate the principle. One of the students of Rabbi Meir was Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi. Rabbi Yehuda, the prince as he was called, he was the head of the Sanhedrin. This was an opportunity that never returned. He actually developed a friendship with the Roman Emperor Antonius. I don't know which Antony this was. It was Antonius II or whatever. I don't know. Which meant that first there was a respite from persecution, but aside from that, he had unlimited funding. He was very wealthy, as being close to the emperor. What he did was he assembled all the rabbis. He gathered them all together, and he said, "Don't do anything, just stay here." Supported them. He personally supported them, and collected all the different opinions on any given halacha. Which means this would be one place where they heard all the different opinions. And they were able to work things out together, arguing them through, because all the opinions were on the table. Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi then went and wrote them down, but on the basis of Rabbi Meir's examples, Rabbi Meir's cases. This is what we know today as the Mishnah. The Mishnah is a bunch of cases on halachas and names, who says this and who says that, who says what. What he was doing was using the cases of Rabbi Meir, giving the different opinions, and setting it up in an order where you would understand who he decided the halacha was like. Generally speaking, if something was written as a Mishnah that was authorless, Stam Mishnah, and then an opinion was brought in, what he was trying to say was follow the Stam Mishnah, follow the opinion that does not have an author, does not have a name. If you had a case where one Mishnah just brought the halacha without any names, and then another Mishnah later that brought names on either side, then the halacha was not like what the Mishnah originally had without any of the names. He would also write certain things in the names of the rabbis, the chachamim. That was his way of saying this is the consensus. So he gathered all the opinions, used the case of Rabbi Meir, and then used his way of showing you whom to follow. The Mishnah was meant to accompany a live oral tradition. This was not the sum total of the oral law. Students were still studying under their teachers for 24 years. That seems to have been the standard. And then what the Mishnah served was, if the principles as you understood them would be able to resolve why this Mishnah said this and that Mishnah said that, then your principle was correct. If your principles would not make sense of why the halacha was different for these two cases that were seemingly identical, then you knew that the tradition you got was not accurate. So the purpose of the Mishnah was to check your old tradition against it. This continued. In Israel, the rabbis were still there up north. They realized that was not enough. One of the students of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, Rabbi Yochanan, in Israel, decided to write what we call the Talmud Yerushalmi. This was the first Talmud, the first Gemara, where he compiled the different opinions, but in the form of conversation, discussion, rather than Mishnah, which means you have Mishnah and then a conversation about the Mishnah, with this one asking this and this one saying that. This too was meant to accompany your oral tradition. But if your principles could make sense of the discussion in the Talmud, then it was accurate, if not, not. Now, Israel fell in, the Roman Empire broke into two. The Eastern and Western Roman Empire, the Byzantines were the Eastern, and they ruled over the Middle East, Israel. They were especially cruel. They had adopted Christianity already by then, and we killed their God as far as they were concerned, and they tortured Jews to death. Most of the nation left Israel. There was almost no presence left, and everyone fled to Babylon. In Babylon, there were always the great academies, the big yeshivot in Babylon. The heads of them were called the Gaonim. No, actually, this is before the prime. Sorry, that happened later. The heads of them were the head of the academy in Babylon was known as the Reish Galusa, which is the equivalent of a king, but the head of the exile, which was recognized by the local authorities.
Very interesting name.
The head of the diaspora. They continued teaching the Mishnah and the oral tradition. 4 generations later, they realized the same thing that Rabbi Yochanan had realized back in Israel. They realized that they could write down more than just the Mishnah. So they wrote the Babylonian Talmud. First was the Jerusalem Talmud, this is the Babylonian Talmud. What's interesting is that the Israeli one was called the Jerusalem Talmud. It was not written in Jerusalem. No one lived in Jerusalem then. The Jews that lived up north. It was called the Jerusalem Talmud because Israel was known as Jerusalem. This was known as the Babylonian Talmud, same idea, discussion to accompany your oral law, your oral tradition. If your oral tradition could make sense of the discussion in the Gemara, it was accurate. If it couldn't, it wasn't.
What's the main things that are not the same in Bavli and Yerushalmi?
The Yerushalmi is much more concise. Another major difference is that in Talmud Bavli, we do not find the entire Seder's drawing, the laws, mitzvot, all the laws that pertain to Eretz Yisrael were not studied that much in Babylon because they didn't apply. Whereas in the Yerushalmi they did.
Do we learn the Talmud Yerushalmi?
We certainly do, not as much as the Bavli, but we do.
Where is it most found that people learn in Talmud Yerushalmi?
First one, Zerayin, because there is no Bavli. Seder's Run, that's not the most popular one. And one other Masechta that for some reason was incorporated into Talmud Bavli, which is Shkolim. Shkolim of Yerushalmi is printed with the Bavli. I don't know who made that decision. Today, you're not considered having completed the Bavli if you don't study Shkolim as well.
What is Shkolim?
Shkolim, it basically deals with the money that was collected every year to finance the public sacrifices, the daily sacrifice, the sacrifice that were brought for the Chagim. And that would be financed by the public, and every year that was collected in the month of Adar. The beginning of Shkolim discusses that, the first five chapters, and then after that it goes into a lot of other things.
So Shkolim is part of Daf Yomi.
It's part of Daf Yomi, even though it's Yerushalmi. Yeah. It's generally studied after Psalm. And that's where it's printed, Psalm Mishkalim. This continued, and they were still teaching, there was still a direct oral transmission accompanying the Talmud Bavli. The finishing touches on the Talmud Bavli were made by the way we call the rabbis. The rabbis of the Mishnah are called Tanaim. The rabbis of the Gemara are called Amoraim. The ones who put the finishing touches on the Bavli it was two generations, the Rabbanan Savoroi, they're called. Savoroi, who were followed by the Gaonim. The Gaonim were the heads of the academies in Babel. To be a Gaon, you had to know the whole of Torah with all the secrets. And again, they were recognized by the government. This lasted until 7th century. What swept the world in the 7th century was Islam. Early 7th century, by and large, the Middle East went Islamic. The Muslims, unlike the Christians, were not executing Jews for no reason. Instead, they placed heavy taxation on the Jewish communities in Babylon. If the communities didn't come up with the money, they would hang the leaders or torture them to death. But it was all about money. As a result of that, the Gaonim said that one should not leave Babylon because this is the Torah center of the world. And even though it meant that money was being extorted from you, you had no choice, stay there. Well, the people didn't listen. And at first they trickled out, but eventually they left en masse. What happened was they started moving all over the Middle East, including, and then they got to Spain, North Africa. Some got as far as Italy, Western Europe. They got to England and France. Parts of what today are Germany. The leadership, though, did not leave. The rabbinical leadership did not leave Babylon, but the people did. And then something happened. This is the famous story of the 4 captives. What happened was that because they had to come up with money and they had lost much of their population, they would travel to do fundraising to these new Jewish communities. They traveled by boat on the high seas. On the high seas, the boat was intercepted by pirates. They did not know who these rabbis were. They knew they were Jewish. They ransomed them to different Jewish communities around the world. Without knowing it, these Jewish communities bought themselves Gaonim. This is how the total leadership got to the Jews. And this pretty much was the end of
brothers.
What's this?
Brothers.
Oh yeah, Hashem made this happen. And it's been taken as a lesson over the generations that you can't be stubborn and ignore the population. If they're leaving, you can go with them.
This was the second time they went to Babylon?
Yeah.
No, the first was after the first bit.
First, yeah.
Okay.
So now what we had this is the end of the era of the Gaonim. We had Jewish communities in different places. So for example, North Africa got themselves a Gaon. Italy got themselves a Gaon. We had communities as far as Algeria.
Which ones were spread?
So what happened was that Rabbeinu Hushiel Gaon got to Fez in North Africa, his son Rabbeinu Hananel got to Rome. They are the ones that stand out most because we're going to get to a lot of the basis for the mesorah came through them. So I want to talk about it and go through some names. We don't have that much time. Let's get started. The Jewish community in Fez, in Morocco is at the northern tip of Africa. It was a large community with a yeshiva there, and as said, they got themselves was Rabbi Berkovits Gaon, one of the four captives, and the one who studied under him, that then became the leader of Fez, was Rabbi Yitzchak Al-Fasi, Rabbi Yitzchak of Fez. He's known as the Rifid.
That's the end of the Gemara, right?
It's in the back of the Gemara they printed there. He was really the one that established the. He was the teacher of the oral tradition in North Africa. That was in Fez in Morocco. His student was Rabbi Yitzchak of Gez, the Rim Magashis is called, whose student was Rabbeinu Maimon, who then moved to Spain, and his son was the Rambam, the Moshe ben Maimon, who, by the way, traveled with his father to North Africa when he was a child. When his father went to compare notes with his teacher, Rabbi Yosef Magash, so much so that the Rambam in several places refers to the Rim Magash as his Rebbe, although the last time he saw him he was 3 years old. In his introduction to his commentary on Mishnah, he says, I consider him my Rebbe because everything I know my father taught me, and my father was taught by him. So this was one direct oral tradition that came from the Gaonim to North Africa and then to Spain. On the other side, one of the Gaonim, Rav Hai Gaon, we're not sure if this was after he left or before he left Babylon. He had a student, Rabbeinu Gershon. Rabbeinu Gershon traveled to France and settled down there. His student was Rabbeinu Yaakov ben Yakar, who was the Rebbe of Rashi. So Rashi had a direct oral tradition going back to Rav Hai Gaon, to the Gaon. So we have two lines of tradition. There's one other one, and that is in Rome itself. Rome, Rabbeinu Hananel was there. Everyone communicated with Rabbeinu Hananel, but he was in the Jewish community in Rome, and it seems like the Roman Jewish community have totally different customs than everybody else. They have till to this very day. They have a shul here in Tadia, I think it is, where they have their own davening. It's totally different than everybody else's. Totally different. And their claim is that it's from the days of Rabbeinu Hananel, it's from the early and possibly earlier. They say that there were Jews in the time before the destruction that already lived in Rome.
But that's still Judaism.
Oh yeah, the halachas are the same.
Oh.
The customs are different and the davening is different. Yeah, I mean they're Orthodox Jews. They had the Gemara. Now they study the same Gemara. All other Jews do.
If they study the same Gemara but they have their own customs, how do they get?
Because customs cannot do the Gemara.
Okay.
Now, with these two mesorahs, they weren't all that far apart. Spain and North Africa on the one side, and then primarily France on the other side. How far are they? There was a major problem. The Christians and the Muslims were fighting over Europe. Spain was under Islamic rule. certainly North Africa, whereas France was under the Christians. And if you communicated, you would be accused of espionage. So these two communities were out of touch with one another for like 100 years. As a result of it, we find that all the discussions in halacha and the various customs that formed in two different places, really. The Frenchies and the Spaniards, as they called them. It was the Sephardim and Tsarfati.
Sephardim.
The Tsarfati, the Frenchies. They are the forerunners of the Ashkenazim, because after the Crusades, they fled France and went to Germany. Germany is Ashkenazim Hebrew. That later, but for the time being, understand that there are two lines of the oral tradition, one in Spain and North Africa, and the other one in France. Rashi coming directly, from Rabbi Gaon, from the Gaonim, and the Rambam coming also directly from Rabbi Maimon, Rimagash, Rif, going back to Rabbi Hanan. So we'll leave it at that. We'll continue.